I've got the fuselage all finished painted, so I'll be moving it up into the basement again to start putting everything together. And one of the things I want to put on there is this fuel tank. So I'm not worried anymore about this nipple for this pickup tube getting knocked off there. That'll be going on the fuselage here pretty soon. So I'm going to get ready to go ahead and put that in. First thing I'm going to do is take the die grinder and take some of this fiberglass down, smooth this all off here where I cut that patch out before, and get that ready to glue that patch back on there. I've got some Pro Seal here. That's a fuel proof sealant, and I'll mix that up, and there's a couple of washers that go on over this hole to help seal it up that go in around that bulkhead fitting that goes through there. I'll use that to seal that up, and then that pickup tube goes down and lays on the bottom of the fuel tank in there, and that was held down with Pro Seal, so I'll use a little bit of that to put in there on that pickup tube to hold it down. Once I get this bulkhead fitting in, that pickup tube in, then I can go ahead and fiberglass in this handhole cover, and then the fuel tank will be all finished and ready to go on the airplane. I'll let that Pro Seal sit out here in the sunshine for a little bit too. Hopefully it'll soften up and be a little easier to mix. I don't know if that's the same stuff. It's very similar to stuff we used to use in the Air Force to seal up the fuselage and stuff on antennas and things on there. And I think we called it 101 pumps or something like that, but you had to pump it 100 times to get it all thoroughly mixed. I got my fitting in for the pickup tube. This is a number 890 bulkhead fitting, 1/2 inch. It's got a fitting, an end like this, it's 37-degree end like this on the other end, but then it's longer and it's threaded up in, and then you put a nut on it so that it tightens up on the bulkhead. It's sandwiched between two washers. There's a washer here on the outside to give some support, some load to this fiberglass, and one on the inside under the nut. This will be reduced down to a number 6 fitting, 3/8 fitting to go into the fuel pump. I used Pro Seal on that underneath the washer and around that fitting to go in there to seal up that gap, and the same thing on the underside on the washer that went up there. I put a little Pro Seal on the top of the washer when I stuck it in there, so that should seal up real good. On the inside there's a 1/2 inch copper tubing that has a flare on one end of it and a flare fitting to match this aviation flare fitting on that bulkhead fitting, and that screws into it, and then that copper tube goes down and bends down and lays on the floor down there, and then on the end of it there's a screen that's soldered together and soldered onto the end of that. I put that on. I put a little bit of sea lube on that, fuel lube on that. Yeah, fuel lube on that fitting, just to make sure it seals up good and doesn't freeze on there. I should never have to take it off, but a little bit of Gookumpucky doesn't hurt anything on there. That stuff doesn't get hard. I used a 3/4 inch wrench here on the outside to hold this fitting. Actually, I wound up turning the fitting on the outside with that because there's not a whole lot of room on inside there to turn that nut. I did turn it a little bit. I used a crescent wrench on the inside on that nut. I have open end box end wrenches that would fit that, but I think it's an inch or an inch and a 1/16 or something like that, and the wrench is really long. It'd be hard getting in there on that nut to begin with, but then you'd never be able to turn it or anything to tighten it up. And there is the pickup tube down there, and I gobbed a bunch of Pro Seal around it. I'm not sure why it keeps it from flopping around, but it's screwed in tight to this bulkhead fitting, so it shouldn't flop around any at all anyway. But that's in there, tightened up, and that's the pickup tube there. That's Pro Seal. Well, let's call it Flame Masters Corporation Chem Seal Division sealing compound. It is pretty much what I thought it was. We used to get this stuff, actually we'd get some in smaller tubes than that, shorter tubes than that we'd use to seal up fittings and stuff on the fuselage of the airplanes, the pressurized airplanes in the Air Force. It takes, well, it says on the instructions at least 75 strokes on that, but yeah, that's what we used to call 101 stroke, I think. But you got to pump it and pump it to get the activator mixed in with, it's kind of a rubberized stuff, but it's fuel proof. Avgas won't hurt it. I used some MEK to wipe down the tools and stuff and clean up the mess left by that. That stuff is nasty. It gets all over everything and it's sticky. So MEK cut it. Oh, I didn't use a whole lot of this stuff. I didn't use half of it. And that stuff's pretty expensive, so I kind of hate to throw it away, but that's the way it is. It's once you mix it up. Now they make a gun that you get to use to apply that stuff, but I didn't have that, and I haven't used enough of it to justify the price of a gun. They're expensive too. I just had this big wooden dowel that I used. I've used this to drive out bearings and seals and stuff like that. I wrapped it up in a rag so it wouldn't contaminate anything, and I just used this and pushed on it to push the stuff out with, and that worked fine for no more than what I needed. So this stuff will set up. I don't know how long that stuff takes to cure, but this stuff's set up. I took a grinding disc and ground out around this edge here and got that all cleaned up. I can't find my piece that I cut out of that, but I need to find that and mix up some resin, and then I can close this thing up. We got this pickup tube put in. This is a 90-degree number 8 bulkhead fitting, and it's tied into a piece of copper tubing down there that runs down into the bottom, and we got it sealed with some Pro Seal here, and then glued down to the bottom with Pro Seal down there on the copper tubing. So it was time to close this top up here, this handhold cover. I cut this handhold cover out back when I first started working on this fuel tank a year or so ago. Might have been longer than that, I don't know, but that's when I took this filler neck out and started to get an idea what I was doing with this thing. And I've been holding that blank that I cut out of that. I've been saving it and protecting it, keeping track of it since that time. And the last time that I saw it, I had it together with these pieces here that I cut out on the top, intending to put it back in to fill that hole and then just to glue a patch over the top of it. Well, wouldn't you know that yesterday when I got ready to put that in there, I couldn't find that thing anyplace. I searched for it for 30-40 minutes or more looking for it, and I couldn't find hide nor hair of it. But it doesn't really matter anyway, because it just fits down in that hole, and it wouldn't have added any strength to anything. It would have just plugged the hole. What I figured on doing on it was just taking a piece of this mat and gluing onto the top of it and making it firm, and then setting it down in there and gluing it to this ring here that's in here that they put over the original hole. But since I didn't have that to work with, I had some mat, and I cut out a circle of mat just about 2 inches around, bigger than what the hole is, and I put it on a piece of plastic, mixed up a little bit of epoxy resin and poured on that, and not to fill the weave, just to put in there enough to stiffen it up like I did before with these other little strips. So I just glued that piece in on there, and it was stiff enough that it sagged a little bit to kind of match the contour of this. Once I got it on, I noticed that it was kind of porous there. There were spots in it where the resin didn't fill the weave all the way. There's some gaps in there between those glass fibers and stuff where it kind of got stretched out when I put it on. So I cut another piece of fabric mat and mixed up some more resin and set that piece of fabric on top of there, and then went ahead and filled that weave real good with the resin on that. So I got plenty of resin in there to make sure that it was all filled. Well, I just took my little palm sander with some 120 grit paper and just went over that just to smooth it out, to make sure there's no spears or sharp points or anything sticking out that are going to rub into the bottom of the fuselage, into the fabric. Yeah, I went down to my local aircraft supply Napa and got a new fuel cap and put on. This is identical to the one that came off of there, except it's not all rusty on the inside. The only thing left to do on this now is to put that quick drain in, and I've got it put away up there someplace in the basement where I've been working on everything. Hopefully it's not with that fiberglass plug that came out of there. Anyway, I'll put that in. So I want to get this set up on the fuselage so I can get the fuel line hooked up to it. The fuel line comes from the pump and goes to this. I want to get that hooked up because that's underneath the rear seat. The fuel pump is back underneath the baggage compartment, but the hookup for this is underneath the rear seat, and there's a under seat storage compartment that goes in there. That's got to go in before the seat goes down, and for the other panels and stuff go in on the airplane, in the interior panels and stuff go on. Well, I need a gasket to go between that belly tank and the bottom of the fuselage. This is the closest thing I can get to a gasket around here. It's a piece of neoprene type foam. So I've got it laid out on top of the fuel tank. I'm going to go ahead and cut it out around the perimeter, and then I'm going to cut inside the perimeter about 1 inch. So I've just got 1 inch wide gasket all the way around that top of that tank. It doesn't need to cover the whole tank, seal the whole tank, just to prevent fumes and stuff like that from going between the tank and the fuselage and to keep that from abrading on the bottom of the fabric. I've got the tank masked off because I'm going to use contact cement on there and spray on that to hold that gasket down, and there's no point in putting contact cement on that new paint job. There's the gasket cut out. I'll spray some contact cement on both the fuel tank and the gasket and then stick it down. I'm going to split the gasket back there in the back where it goes down that stringer, which is kind of the low spot of everything, so any water that might accumulate in there will run out the back of it. The gasket's installed on there, got it all glued down. It's not as pretty as it could be if it come out of a molding machine or something for that, but I don't think they make a gasket for that specifically. I think it has to be custom made. Anyway, that's not going to look too bad in 10 years or so. Well, I can move all this stuff out of here now and bring the fuselage back in here.